Morning, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. This morning we have two items on our agenda. The first is a report from the Committee Evaluation and Review Board's report. We are glad to have you here today to report out on the final findings and your recommendations. And then after that, we are going to have an interim update from the Infrastructure Funding Working Group. So today's our report day. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Cummings to kind of just frame the conversation for us on this, but I just want to say I'm so glad that we are here with the final report. I know there's a lot of work that went into this and look forward to discussing the recommendations. So Ms. Cummings, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Stewart. Today we have the Committee Evaluation and Review Board here to present their final report, their findings and recommendations. Just to give a little bit of background, Montgomery County Code Article 11, Section 2 through 146, mandates the evaluation of both the boards, committees, and commission system as a whole and individual advisory bodies. The statute outlines that the purpose of this group is to review the group system in each then existing board, committee, commission, task force, and report to the executive and council its recommendations for changes in the individual BCCs and task forces and the group system as a whole, and to submit both an interim report to the executive and council as well as a final report. And with that, we have our presenters here.
Chair Stewart, Councilmember Kotz, Councilmember Evans, thank you so much for this opportunity for us to present the final report of the Committee Evaluation Review Board, CERB, to you today. My name is Sophia Orlowski. I live in Clarksburg. I've been a county resident for 14 years, and for the past 20 years of my professional life, I've worked globally supporting civic organizations and government leaders in strengthening public engagement, service delivery, human rights protections, and advancing democratic innovation. For the past 18 months, I've had the privilege of co-chairing this unique advisory board.
Good morning. My name is Muriel Hairston Cooper. I have the pleasure of working with Sophia as well as the other members of the board that are sitting behind me. It's been a privilege to serve the county in this capacity. I've been a resident here, I'm telling my age, for 25 years. We raised our children here, and I would love for our kids to move back to Montgomery County. Currently, my day job is with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, where I've worked in a number of positions there. I'm currently in charge of relationship development, but I've also done events and communications, as well as worked directly with the president. Thank you for having us.
We would also like to acknowledge other members of the CERB present here today: Carl Pitt, Marianne Keefe, Clint Sobrati, and Catherine Sindos, and other members are with us virtually. Finally, our work would not have been possible without the tremendous dedication, hundreds of hours of work and support from Ken Harmon Espada, Beth Gorkrich, Eritrea Thomas, and Nika Smallwood. So in the short time we have today, we briefly will review the CERB's purpose and outline key findings, provide high-level recommendations for the county systems of boards, committees, and commissions as a whole, and then present just a very short summary of determinations on the individual BCCs. Our report is much more comprehensive, and we look forward to the discussion today.
So sorry, I guess that's me. So again, thank you for this privilege. Thank you to my colleagues here for working with us. I think this shows that Montgomery County is a very civic-minded community. Excuse me. We were appointed, believe it or not, in May of 2024 to conduct the first comprehensive review of the county's advisory boards in over 10 years. About 12 years, there was one done, and we just discovered recently that in the early 2000s, there was another one done. The process originally was 12 months, but due to the intensity of the work and us wanting to get it right, we asked for an extension, so it was 18 months, and it included meeting observations, self-evaluation questionnaires, interviews with the directors of departments, and analysis of governing documents and websites, and more so, I think that's important, in 2026, our evaluation emphasized equitable engagement to assess representation of diverse of residents that make up Montgomery County, which is why we live and love the county so much. Just to give you a few, I'm a data girl, so just to give you a little bit of data, over 1,000 county residents participated in this, in the BCCs. What we know is that the BCCs are mission critical to the county governance, and we know you recognize that. We also know that by just having over 1,000 and people applying, that there is a strong commitment and engagement overall. And with that, it brings diverse and deep professional and lived experiences to these boards.
However, because we met once in 10 years and we wanted to make sure that we capture all the potential for improvement in the system, we identified a number of systemic weaknesses that unfortunately undermine the effectiveness and equitable engagement through the BCCs. So the first group of findings, and we will present our findings in these thematic categories, is on governance and oversight. Through our various data collection tools, the surveys, the interviews and observations, and also examination of hundreds of documents from all the advisory BCCs, the SERB found that the current system unfortunately lacks clarity on which branch of the government oversees it, and correspondingly on the lines of accountability for acting on the recommendations or issues raised by the advisory boards. This is related to the fact that the laws governing BCCs have evolved over decades without standardization, resulting in contradictory requirements for membership, functions, and reporting. So the primary recommendation here is to streamline governance and clarify oversight roles. Some of the critical change pathways include conducting comprehensive revision of the legislation governing BCCs using a uniform approach to articulate purpose, authorities, functions, and membership requirements, and critically, clear mechanisms for acting on BCC recommendations and reports should be established and enforced. The second critical finding is the overly complex regional and thematic structure. I'm sure this is not a surprise. So many BCCs have been established over time without a strategic review that the system kind of became increasingly opaque, conflating geographic, economic, and other thematic purposes. The result is a system that appears incongruent and is confusing to residents. We as a board spent an inordinate amount of time trying to untangle all the different dependencies. And we found that county staff also have difficulty tracing all the interconnections. We observed that some advisory boards feel more like a burden to some departments as opposed to partners, and their added value is not clear. And conversely, the level of authority and influence of BCCs on counties' policies and decisions is also not uniformly articulating, which results in demotivation of board members and attributes to retention issues. So here our recommendations are pretty straightforward. It would be absolutely important to standardize classifications of boards, which ones are advisory, which ones are coordinating bodies, which ones are quasi-agencies. We attempted to do some of this work in our report. Streamline functions through uniform approach to articulating the charters, realign regional structures, and that's a big topic that we can talk about in the Q&A, and consolidate duplicative BCCs. We also attempted some of these recommendations in our report, and absolutely establish clear decision-making guardrails and opportunities to escalate issues that are brought by the residents.
In addition, we found a lot of room for potential for improvement. As we all know, nothing is perfect, and it's always a good process to try to improve. Some of our findings included that the staffing levels have remained stagnant for 15 years, but yet the BCCs have grown. We also found that the communication, which I am a communications person, so I cannot stress enough how important it is to communicate, but the communication between the BCCs, the departments, and the council wasn't always consistent, and there were no real formal feedback loops to allow for open communications. And what we suggest and or recommend is that first and foremost, increase centralized staffing in the executive's office, and then to provide comprehensive training to staff and members, because a lot of times the members of the BCCs, they apply, they get on the advisory committee and then find out it's not quite what they thought it was going to be. So we think comprehensive training would be incredibly helpful. And then improve department level support. And again, because I'm a data girl, we've got to have that data. We've got to have those facts backing up these decisions. We also found that there are chronic vacancies and attendance issues in spite of the fact that COVID showed us we can do almost anything from home, but we still are having attendance issues and vacancies. Also, big is not always good. The boards are often too large, making participation difficult. And as we know, trying to bring a big group of people together to come to decisions sometimes is very difficult, and some of those numbers need to be diminished. And then finally, because we live in Montgomery County and our reputation is based on diversity, and we pride ourselves in that, correct? So what we found is membership requirements sometimes conflict with diversity goals. And by that we mean that youth and underrepresented communities don't have representation. And we think that that's probably the easiest, problem to fix, because we just need to better communicate and get the word out to different audiences. And so our recommendations would be to standardize membership structures and roles across the board, streamline and again target recruitment, and then perhaps even offer some incentives for folks. We know that the younger adults may have childcare issues. Even for this, we all, well, not all of us, because a couple have retired, but this became sort of a second job, a labor of love, but it was still a second job. It was a lot of work. And so perhaps incentives would encourage folks to come out and participate in these committees.
So hand in hand with participation comes visibility. Even though we have over 1,000 people volunteering on the advisory boards, the OLO report in 2024 and also our most recent check suggests that about 10% of board seats remain vacant. And so it's unclear to us how the public is supposed to be excited to participate on these boards if they don't even know that they exist. And our own individual experiences on SERB confirm that we don't really hear or read about advisory boards and commissions anywhere unless we are subscribed to specific newsletters. So if a person wanted to find a BCC of interest, they would need to navigate outdated and sometimes redundant websites. We found that difficulty. The county also expects residents to purposefully seek out information about BCCs or delivers it through channels that require opting in the first place. And so this severely limits our audience to those who already show interest in what's going on in the county by subscribing to county newsletters, but they may still not even read those newsletters. To open the possibility of robust participation, we think it's important to ensure that residents know that BCCs exist and what their role is in supporting county services and policies. The public must trust that these boards are active and that they will channel resident input responsibly into the relevant decisions. So at the very least, we suggest here improving websites and developing some sort of one-stop solution to researching and contacting advisory boards. Right now, it's a very time-consuming process. Aggressive outreach should be implemented through centralized resources. We thought about the Public Information Office. And also critically, it's important to use information channels and formats that our residents use most reliably. So doing some research and planning around that. The last recommendation reflects our SERB's own experience. We found it incredibly challenging as a volunteer board with very diverse backgrounds that came together for the first time in 2024 to embark on an evaluation effort without an established results framework or an assessment toolkit. We had to develop our own assessment methodology and data collection tools. We spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours combined collecting data, and we narrowed down our scope to produce a meaningful result in a very condensed time frame. The assessment was further complicated by the lack of strategic plans for each BCC. Many boards struggled to articulate impact when we asked them, and leaned primarily on output and procedural indicators. The SERB members believe strongly that once in a decade evaluation by an ad hoc committee like ours is not the right tool to assess the effectiveness of this system. Instead, we think that a continuous improvement approach should be implemented by professionally trained county staff. A vision for the BCC system as a whole should also be developed as part of the county's strategic plan and articulated to the public. Monitoring and evaluation of BCCs should be tied into the department's own strategic planning and performance reviews.
And so in closing, our recommendations for the BCCs, we reviewed 54 BCCs. And out of that number, we said that 13 should continue without change, which is about a quarter. 24 should continue with modifications. 11 eliminate through consolidation, and 6 need to be reclassified because they do not meet the criteria of the non-advisory. They're in the non-advisory tier collection and not functioning as a traditional BCC as defined by the county. Again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you to my colleagues for all of their hard work, to Sophia for leading us, to your staff for guiding us through this process. We know that Montgomery County's BCC system, it's vital, it's critical, it's who we are. We are civically engaged folks. It's a great engagement tool, but it's complex. And it's not necessarily effective, and it's disconnected from residents. And so we believe after 18 months of looking at this, that some steps to be taken include simplifying the structure of this, improving accountability, making it easy and desirable for residents to participate, and going back to the data, demonstrate measurable impact. Because people are volunteering for this, but they're doing it for an impact, for a reason, to see the end results. And we don't think that they're necessarily seeing the end results. And as the council members, you all want to see the end results too, I believe. And so while there is a breakdown on each of these advisory committees individually, but to look at them on an individual level is great, but we think there needs to be more so. The bigger question is a system-wide reform has to happen before we start drilling down to the individual ones, and that meaningful change is going to require some thought. It's going to require some work. We've put in 18 months, so we started it, and dedication of resources and commitment. And so again, thank you all for reviewing our report.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Hartman-Espada, do you have anything to add?
Thank you so much, Chair Stewart and members of the GO Committee. This has been a long road, and I applaud not only the co-chairs but all the members of the SERB who are here in person. This has been an incredible example of the value of getting residents involved in our BCCs, but it has also been a lot of work. And the dedication that their commitment to stay with it, to dive in, and to present what I think is a very comprehensive review of our 40-year-old system of boards, committees, and commissions. I mean, clearly there's some broader policy issues that we need to think about. The synergy of our BCC structure with our departments and our policy making structure is something we need to think hard. How do they get plugged into policy making, and also how do they fit with our communication strategy? We recruit people to come in and talk to us about issues, but does that preclude a broader conversation with the community, with members who are not at the table? And so that's something that certainly is going to take some thought and some effort. There are some short-term takeaways that we are pursuing. One is a simplification of the application process. Right now, every position on every BCC it gets its own process and advertisement and a time frame to apply. And we need to find a way to simplify that, to have a one size fits all application and a process. Structure, SERB members mentioned this, through the years, each board gets established by resolution or in county code, and it's its own thing. Each legislation talks about the leadership and the membership and the who's ex officio, and there isn't much after action evaluation. Did that work? Maybe sunsets are necessary on our boards to require us to think about this more frequently. Definitely we need to provide to our departments expectations, not only in consistent support across the board, but in utilization of our boards in our work. And definitely there are expectations also of our volunteer members. Leadership can change over time, can really affect productivity of the committee. You have 1 year, you have several years of a good chair, and then you have another chair, and there isn't consistency. There isn't a method to ensure that there is consistency over time. And there's also often confusion about what's the role of staff. Are we our own thing as our committee, or are we a component unit of that department? And do we fit in? I want to close by pointing out the staff that works with me on the boards, committees, commissions. Eritrea and Nikki Smallwood are back in the audience. They support me. They support Beth. Eritrea is a fantastic strategic thinker on where to take this to, but she's split between many different offices. But most of all, Beth Gottreich is the woman who keeps the chocolate factory moving. You remember right?
You pointed to me when you said that?
But it's I Love Lucy reference for those who are
Yes.
younger in the audience.
Believe me, I knew.
But I firmly believe Beth advertises and processes more hires, because these are hires. We're hiring volunteers who are appointed and then confirmed by the council to our board BCC structure than we do county employees. If you just watch the number of appointments that come across your consent calendar, it's all flowing through Beth from our departments. She's the coordinator of it all, and we need to provide more support in both streamlining and in dividing up the workload between our office and our departments, and also providing more help to Beth.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll kick us off and just, again, thank you for this report. I do remember when you came to this committee and asked for an extension, because you're like, wow, there's a lot here. And we were like, absolutely, because we need to get this right. The one thing I would like to do is actually step back from a moment, because I think it's important, as you said, it's confusing to residents. And I think we all received some questions even about who was included in this review. So could we just take a step back and define BCC and who was included in this review? And because we know there are a lot of resident groups we have. Our Office of Community Partnerships has many advisory groups, and they fall in a very different category than our BCCs. So do we have a definition we could provide folks of what is considered a BCC and what was included in this review?
So this was one of the challenging items as well to start with, because we looked at the 2012 SERB report, and there was a long list of BCCs, everything that was established at the time. We wanted to make sure that we are purposeful in our understanding of what we're evaluating, and the statutory language is not very clear on that. So the approach that we took is we consult with the county attorney's office, and we focus solely on the boards that are identified as advisory in Section 2147 of the county code. And so there is a whole classification system that we had to develop in order for us to understand where each body fits as we go through and assess whether they're eligible for our evaluation or not. We ended up with 5 tiers, as we call them. One would be these advisory boards, as identified in the code. Then coordinating bodies, which would be composed of representatives of county agencies and external agencies to coordinate efforts, but not necessarily advise the council and the executive from the point of view of residents. Then number 3 would be a regulatory body that primarily performs regulatory functions, say permitting or complaint review and adjudication, or policy development for the county. Number 4 is quasi-county agency, so performs regularly scheduled work to implement county programs, and has a dedicated budget and staff, so we also set those aside. Mm-hmm. And then external, which are established by mandates outside of the county, for example, to implement federal programs and things like that. So we started with about 98. Mm-hmm. The number was also kind of elusive. It was 92, 96, 98. So that you see where the difficulty comes in. There's a lack of clarity on what the system is also to start with. So we ended up with these advisory boards. So it's boards that are predominantly county residents or representatives of county businesses that are tasked with advising, channeling resident input, and advising county departments on specific issues of concern.
Great. And each of the BCCs that you covered, as Mr. Hartman Espada and you all talked about, were created either through resolution or changes in the code, and each of the BCCs the county executive nominates and the council confirms participants. So I just wanted to be clear, because we do have, like in the Office of Community Partnerships, the different advisory groups, but those are created by the county executive, and we do not, if I remember correctly, confirm the participants of those groups.
That's correct. And likewise with the health initiatives and the HHS, those are there's no executive order, resolution, law that establishes them, and the board committee commission law specifically, as they define them, defines these groups as appointed and having some legal basis. The law also very specifically lists out the advisory boards, and which is one of the struggles, was this list isn't complete, and there are some groups on this list who really don't fit that quality. They're not an advisory board. They're fulfilling more of a policy coordination, and their membership is largely staff and interagency. There was a lot of that discussion with the county attorney to put these groups in the right boxes.
Great. Terrific. Well, that was all the work that was done even before you started. I remember. So I really appreciate that. And in your report, I think it's on page 25, there's a list and the different classifications and your recommendations, because I know there are about 6 of these or so that you're recommending reclassified. So appreciate that. The other question I have is maybe teasing out kind of where do we go from here, right? I think having this report right now is really important. It is also a time when, as we know, we will have a new county executive this fall, and much of the operations of this, where this lives, is in the county exec's office. Some of the things you've identified in the report and in your recommendations was to look system-wide before looking at the individual committees, BCCs, and we appreciate that each of the BCCs do have recommendations attached. But I was just curious if you had thoughts on, where should we start? And Mr. Hartman-Espada, I'll also give you the opportunity to respond to that, understanding that we will be having a new county executive come in the fall.
I think first, with the new county executive coming in, she or he will need to be briefed and updated on this. And because, again, this is reflective of the county, reflective of your work, it's almost an extension of really being able to reach out to your constituents. And so I would like to think it would be a high priority. But I also think that there needs to be standardization, because right now you have BCCs that are, while they're not running amok, there's a rule for this one, but this one doesn't do that. There's some that can fundraise, there's some that don't. There's some that prepare annual reports, some that don't. And so there needs to just be an overall standard of, this is, what you do, this is what is expected. If it's an annual report or if you fundraise or whatever, but to standardize the rules and the regulations for all of them. I think that will kind of help a lot to just kind of narrow some of this down and bring it into, into working off of this one page.
If I may add, so if we think about the period between now and the elections, right? And presuming nothing will take place between the election day and when the new officials are sworn in, the resources that are available right now are finite. So what low-hanging fruit do we have that we can essentially address? Working on the websites and streamlining information flow about BCCs and what they do and their value so far is absolutely something that can be done in the coming months. Streamlining the recruitment process and figuring out, one of the practical suggestions, if you look in the report, we actually provide examples of what could be done. We suggest a one application for all BCCs that is run on a continuous basis, so you constantly have a pipeline of interested applicants. And it perhaps can be even done in a way that allows people to identify first, second, and third priority of interest, so that if a vacancy is not available on their first choice committee, they can be considered for a second one. And managing this process without deadlines for specific BCCs, but on a rolling basis, absolutely can be done. There are other options in terms of dedicating some communications time to seek out successes and communicating those successes to the public. And in fact, this transition between county administrations and also the transition in the council offers a unique opportunity to highlight what has been accomplished, right? And the work of BCCs absolutely should be part of that communication toolkit, that here's how residents have participated in the past X number of years, here's what we were able jointly together to accomplish. So some work on that as part of the overall county communication strategy could also be done. I think those three are probably the the easiest. With an asterisk, it requires staff time. So we would defer to Ken to figure out how staff time can be allocated, but we also understand that if we talk about it, a centralized approach to public outreach, it goes to public information, it goes to partnerships with media and otherwise through which information can be disseminated. Ultimately, I think it's building blocks to start bringing our residents into the fold so they actually even just know that there is this tool. And then it creates this natural transition opportunity, whatever the new administration will look like, to take a hard look at these systemic changes. One of the recommendations that we discussed at length in our meetings is figuring out a sunsetting opportunity for some of the committees and figure out exactly which committees need to report to the council and which committees truly are supportive bodies for the departments that they're assigned to, and delineate the authority and the oversight very clearly, and this will probably require legislative action, so that the information and the analysis and the advice that comes from one subset of committees flows regularly to the council, and council reviews and acts on them. But then the BCCs that advise on the practical implementation of policies and programs are managed by the executive and the county departments, and maybe are not subject to all this rigorous regulatory set of requirements as they currently are. And perhaps they can also have some sort of sunsetting timelines. We talked about one example was the Pedestrian, Bicycle, and Traffic Safety Committee, and as a hypothetical example, is it tied to any particular county program? And when we looked at the history of it, it kind of evolved over the years from being tied to one particular study and plan in the early 2000s to having these broad range of issues. But is it truly the right model for it, or should there be a time-bound task force associated with Vision Zero, for example, that will sunset when the timeline for that program ends? So this is something I think the new leaders of this county will need to be taking a hard look at, and there are many other recommendations of that nature that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman-Espada?
Appreciate the opportunity to add to this. In our remaining 278 days,
But who's counting?
this county, there are some very specific, as I mentioned earlier, short-term guidance. The law allows the CAO to issue guidance to all of our boards and committees regarding their structure, their function, their officers, their role with staff, and we will do that. We will issue clarifying guidance on using best practices to hopefully streamline and clarify for our BCCs what we expect and the value they provide. There's the setting expectations of our departments, challenging them to integrate the work of the BCCs, and all this takes a very thoughtful approach. If you're going to be a successful board and committee, and I've managed a couple in my days, you have to start with the annual setting of, here are our priorities for the next 12 months. Here is our leadership, who is not one leader, but maybe a committee of three, past chair, current chair, vice chair, so that there's continuity over time. And then a real respect that this is the valuable function that staff has. You're not on the island. You are part of a larger department. And then there's the streamlining, as we talked about, the single application portal. Beth and I have taken the opportunity over the last year and a half to talk to other counties and cities to figure out how their process, their practice, and we're looking to implement some of that here. Those are the immediate things we can do in our remaining time. We can also help set up for the next executive some options, and council some options for restructuring. And we'll be working on that too, to leave behind here is the here are your options you have for standardizing. Here are the different parts of the county code you have to address. We'll get to work on that too.
Great. Excellent. Councilmember Evans?
I just wanted to start off first by saying thank you to Ms. Harrison Cooper and Ms. Orlowski, if I pronounced that correctly. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about Montgomery County and how I love that we have such an engaged community, because to know that you all did this in your own free time is just, it blows my mind. But I'm also thankful that you were able to provide this service. This was a really great report. I love the thoughts behind having a standard operating procedure, strategic plans, giving us some low-hanging fruit. So I don't know that I have a lot of questions, but I did think about some of what you said around offering incentives to people. And then if people are stepping forward to really, make sure that it's something that they really want to do. I heard you talk about some not showing up. I don't know if there's some thought behind attendance requirements if you miss 3. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I'm just, you just made me think about a lot of things. But even I think about, so I'm involved in a variety of organizations, and to your point, what we try to do is share when the applications come out about the boards, commissions, and advisory boards around here. But we can do a better job in letting our community know, because I know that people would want to be involved if they have the time. And so I just really appreciate all the work that's gone into it. This is a great start for us, and I appreciate Chair Stewart asking, so where do we go next? Because this was a lot of information, but great feedback. And to Mr. Hartman Espada, I'm scared to just say just part of your name. Thank you for your work. And oh my goodness, I did not know that you did all of this. When I see this in a variety of emails, and thank you, right? So there is, I heard also that we can't have Ms. Pronounce your last name for me? Gokrak, yep, I didn't want to say it incorrectly. Sound like you need some support and help as well, but just all of this makes me think about, as well as my colleagues, about what we need to do to continue serving our community as best as we can. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Councilmember Katz?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First off, thank you all very much for doing this. This I know was not easy, and it's not going to be easy to correct what we're trying to correct, what needs to be corrected. But we're so very fortunate in Montgomery County to have so many people share their talents with us. And people join committees for a variety of reasons. Some it's for a resume, some it's for that they actually want to get additional knowledge or give their knowledge. And we need to make certain that we are doing that, and it doesn't always work. When I read this, it reminded me that several years ago, when I was on the Maryland Municipal League Board of Directors, and I think their Board of Directors had like 28 members, and they decided that I was going to be the person who was going to lower that number for them. And everybody agreed. The one thing everybody could agree on is there was too many people on the board. Everybody agreed with that. Then you had people pull you aside and say, Sydney, I agree, we got to get rid of people, but don't get rid of me, and that's the thing that becomes so necessary, is that we have to figure out what we're trying to do, how we're doing it, do it in a diplomatic way, and not let people think that we're just, not appreciating what they're doing. And not only do we have the 54, which I think nobody in Montgomery County, I don't even know you could say all 54 committees, but not only do we have the 54 committees, but we have municipalities that also have similar committees or additional committees and whatnot. So there's so many opportunities for people to help us, because we need it, but how we're going to do it. And communication is certainly a key here, and the website improvement and the one application is a good idea. The concern that I have with that is, how does somebody even know to apply? And you can have 1,000, it's on their website. Well, somebody had to go to our website. And we don't have We don't have newspapers, quote unquote, anymore. We have some additional items that we didn't used to have, but we don't have that type of communication anymore. I also think that we need to get, if best we can, when we talk about BCCs, we really need to talk about what they are, boards, committees, and commissions. Because, in government, we have a tendency to do that. Well, this is a flip. Well, nobody knows what a flip is, and therefore that becomes that we don't get people there. Just, I guess last week, our weeks run together, but just last week, the GO Committee had a discussion about cable TV and how we need to utilize our cable stations, streaming or whatever it is necessary, so that somebody doesn't necessarily have to be at a meeting, but they can participate either watching it or being a member of it, and that we can archive it so that somebody can go back and use us as a reference. You're doing important topics, but we're not getting there, and people don't know about it. And as far as the first steps, I agree, and I appreciate the chair's questions. I agree we're going to need first steps, but I also believe we need to, on an individual basis, of the 54 committees, we need to sit down on an individual basis, when it's in whoever's going to have to do this, and try to figure out, well, yeah, he has nothing else to do. He can do this. But I was kidding, Ken. Don't get angry at me. But we need, on an individual basis, to sit down with each committee, thank them, say, if you were starting over, what would you do? Because 40 years ago, first off, there's probably nobody on those committees for the 40 years. So how did it start? How do we continue? And what do we need to be doing now? The world has changed. So I think all of this is necessary. This is a very important first step, and I sincerely appreciate it. But this is only a first step. This is really something that we need to get into, and thank our folks. Thank you very much.
I was going to say thank you all for your remarks and comments. And to your point, the longest journey begins with the first step.
Yep.
It does.
And so we've already done that. To Councilmember Evans' point on how do we get the word out, and she just, she mentioned that she's in several groups and she's going to start talking about it more because it's like something but you forget. And so I think that, in our findings and in talking about communications, that we need to also look to some of the other departments, your public information offices, your community outreach offices, and make sure that they're getting the word. I'm a journalism major, so yes, I know it's killing me. Like there's no Gazette, okay? There's almost no Washington Post anymore, but that's another topic for another issue. So but people still go to the grocery store. They still go to the library and they look at those flyers. And so going into those communities, putting it in the languages that they speak, going over to the Asian grocery store on, Georgia Avenue, where people shop. But I think you really have to make a concerted effort to meet people where they are. And I agree with you on the BCCs. And it's like, what does that stand? I'm, as I said, with CBCF, so we use a lot of acronyms. I had to look up what was GO. I'm like, GO, that can't be get out the vote.
I had to look it up too.
So, we need to speak English. Yeah. And so people understand exactly what these are. So I think I'm getting really excited sitting here because I think we're on the right track. And I think when you meet as a full council, if you share this with your colleagues and they begin to say, oh, yeah, okay, let me make sure when I'm sending out my newsletter or however I'm meeting with my constituents to mention that these opportunities, because they are opportunities, you're right. Some people do it for resume value. Some people do it because they're retired and want to have something to do. Some people do it because they're civically engaged. But the key is some people do it. They are actually doing something.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I agree. And I think starting with, as you've mentioned, updating the website and thinking about one application, because even when we do tell folks who, approach us, we're interested in this, and you start ticking off all of the boards and commissions, they're like, oh, like, where do I find all this? It can be even daunting for folks who are wanting to get more engaged. And so, again, this is a first step. I'm excited about it as well because your report is so well done. I mean, we needed a roadmap. Because it was so overwhelming. And I know it was for all of you. And I just want to thank everyone who worked on this and who does this day in and day out. I'm going to ask Mr. Hartman Espada if he would come back to the GO committee, maybe in September, early October. Ms. Cummings, if we want to make a note of that. I think that might be a good time to say, like, what in the interim you all were able to put in place over the next couple of months, and then think about what we are setting up the next administration for. And I think having that at a GO session would be helpful. So we can talk more about the specific timing, but I think September, early October might be appropriate for that. So, okay. All right. With that, thank you again. We will be in touch, and we look forward to putting this in place and moving forward with it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, next we have an interim report from our infrastructure funding work group. This was a work group that grew out of conversations that the council had about our impact taxes and how we were funding our infrastructure, understanding that we probably need to do a lot of work in this area. And we know, given right now what we're looking at our CIP and conversations we're having now, that looking at how we are funding our schools, our transportation, and we added parks to this working group was going to be really important, not just in the short term, but what this work group is tasked with is really looking at long term, how we're funding our infrastructure. And Mr. Smith, I think I'll turn it over to you. You were looking a little lonely up there at first. And I know we have representatives of this task force here with us today, and I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Chair Stewart, and thank you to having us this morning. And I guess I drew the short straw to present today because it is only an interim update, unlike our previous presenters who had gone through a much more robust process. But do want to take some time to thank all of the work group members. There's 11 or 12 of us, 11 others that spend a lot of time on many Fridays to go through this work over the last 6-7 months. We have more work to do because this is an interim update. So want to recognize that I've had a chance to see. Yep, we have a few planning friends here from Ms. Gavoni and Ms. Buckley who have joined us, and we will show the rest of the members momentarily just so that we can do that. We also have support from staff in all of our respective agencies, but as a point of pleasure right now, I'll just mention that Mr. Kenny from our team has been working very closely with us and has done a lot of the work on the CIP and task force data that we will show momentarily. So we have a short presentation. I don't think it'll take more than 12 minutes that we can then give time to the committee to ask questions, make comments and observations. But most importantly, to the millions watching at home or the 5 watching now and the millions that will watch later, as the Chair Stewart noted, this was created by the council resolution, but we just want to highlight a few things because I think this work group has been mentioned a couple of times, especially as we've heard during public hearings, and we just want to make sure everyone's working from the same kind of page. And Chair Stewart did mention this already. We are only looking at schools, transportation, and parks. That's what the resolution looked at because of the growth in infrastructure policy. But others might be observant that we're missing a big chunk from the Department of General Services when it comes to infrastructure. Certainly the themes that we're looking at can be applied there, but if some people are like, oh, you're missing a big chunk of county's capital budget, that is purposeful, and we are focusing on those. Our goal is by the end of this to have funding mechanisms proposed to the policymakers, but more importantly to the council, that are based on the sense of being able to be reviewed by equity, predictability, and sustainability. And so we'll be looking through those lenses and several others. The resolution did request that we do stakeholder outreach both before and after we find our recommendations. Those stakeholders were mentioned in the resolution, and we did conduct that. I'll get to that in a minute. We do need to conduct public outreach, but that was going to be after we have findings and recommendations. And most importantly, we need to ensure, just as our friends with the previous work group, how do we do that and being able to get broadly into the community and make sure that they're understanding this and having an opportunity to comment. And finally, we will submit a report by June 30th, 2026. Which will be after the primary and after the budget is approved. And so I think, just to highlight that, I think this will be important. The findings, the recommendations, the proposed mechanisms have longevity, and that's what the work group is working towards. But for those hoping to have something before the budget is adopted this year, that is not the purpose of this work group. Fingers crossed. As I mentioned, we are represented by, and the council resolution did dictate who was going to be on the work group by agency. We are represented by many agencies in the county that are related to both parks, schools, and transportation. We also have industry, development industry represented on the work group. And so, again, these are the 12 of us plus staff that are supporting this work group that are working mostly on Fridays each month to go through this work. So what have we done so far in terms of the interim update? So we spent the first part of our time, besides just getting to know each other a little bit and getting a game plan, we did in August and September and October do stakeholder outreach. The summary of that outreach is in the packet, as well as our minutes online that you can find on the council homepage. One note is that we are continuing to do outreach to stakeholders. We have not heard from all of them, and specifically mentioned in the resolution. So we are continuing to receive input from the Maryland Municipal League as well as the Maryland State Highway Administration. Either way, as we get that information, we will also meet with them again after we have findings and recommendations. And so there's ample time for them to comment and to opine about what the work group has been working on. A lot of our work has been in this fall and winter has been refining data, both in the capital budget and for future infrastructure needs. And then more recently, we have begun starting to talk about funding mechanisms and proposed funding mechanisms. And one of the things I'll say now is that we need to be able to do this both with in terms of sustainability and predictability, but most importantly, with a lens to racial equity and social justice. And so not only did the work group at least initially talk about how to do that for public outreach, and I think that will become a more robust conversation as we get closer to planning that public outreach in the next month or so. But we also just want to note we will be doing that as we look at proposed funding mechanisms, both historical inequities in funding mechanisms and understanding that, and also tackling a little bit how do funding mechanisms get used to be implemented in an equitable manner, as opposed to just hoping that implementation works in an equitable manner. And so more work to be done on that, but we wanted to just highlight that as in the conversation, part of the conversation, and it will be more robust once we get to the final report. So moving on to some of the work that we have accomplished, we wanted to first do some definitions. I think we understood during the growth and infrastructure policy that definitions were used differently, maybe used differently, and I think when the public looks at the capital budget, they see a slew of projects, but it's hard to understand what all those mean unless there's a particular parochial interest in having, say, a high school renovated or something to that effect. And so these are the three definitions the work group has discussed, and these are our definitions. We're hoping that this can become more of a longevity thing as well as we look at our capital budget and use that in future conversations. We wish we could have shorter terms, but nonetheless, these are what they are. So we have the planned life cycle asset replacement / maintenance. By definition, this is simply just maintaining the things we've already bought. And after 50 plus years of growth, we have bought a lot. And so when a HVAC system is at the end of its life cycle and needs to be replaced, that is a capital expenditure that we need to do because we paid for that school, we paid for that building, and that has nothing to do with growth. And one important note here is that the word PLAR is used sometimes in our capital budget. Our work group is using that far more broadly than just when that term is used in the capital budget. So if you go through the capital budget and you see PLAR, it will not add up to what our work group has done because we are trying to broaden that definition to really encompass the work that is being done under that category. The second one is renovations and upgrades. These are expenditures required to either meet new standards or because a life cycle has been outdated, but doesn't significantly add capacity. I think this can be easily seen as for, say, not necessarily a new high school for capacity, but if you want to replace a high school because it is 50 years old, but the standards when that was built is different now, That is a capital expenditure, but it's not creating new capacity. And for many individuals in the community, it feels like a new school, and it is a new school, but it is simply replacing and renovating, upgrading that. And for highways, it may not be a whole new lane. It is simply just replacing those lanes, the signaling, and all of that to the current standards that we have. And that is a different expense, again, because a lot of this was coming out of growth and capacity. Those are expenditures that are not related to growth and capacity. It's just, again, simply replacing what we've already bought. And then finally is the new capacity. We're adding actual new capacity. One of the easiest ones for us to think about that we've looked at as the work group is, say, the upgrading the multimodal systems in our county to bus rapid transit. Those are creating new capacity in some way, even if they're not creating new lanes everywhere. And so, or another example we'll talk about in a minute that was in the CIP was Crown High School. Current board conversations aside, like that was created for specifically new capacity. So using those definitions, we looked at the current approved CIP, not the recommended one. And that is using those definitions and going through it. And again, this is some of the work Mr. Kinney did with each of the agencies. We can see that we have almost $1.2 billion just for PLR maintenance approved in the budget, almost $1 billion for renovations and upgrades, and then $1.6 billion for new capacity. And one of the most important things to note on the new capacity side is MCPS, that does include Crown, so that would come out in future fiscal years. And as my colleagues from Office of Management and Transportation have talked about, the transportation new capacity does include several bus rapid transit projects that have a lot of federal funding into it. And so we actually have talked, and we'll get to it in a moment, new capacity is not even as high as that is in the current CIP, or may not be as high as that if you pull out a few of those projects. The other thing we did is there was wanted to update kind of the maintenance tables. Others might have known those as the Infrastructure Maintenance Task Force that's been around off and on. Rather than updating those tables the same way, and a lot of the ways that work has been done just by council staff reaching out to agencies, the work group did want to tackle that and kind of refine that approach because it has kind of has weeds, it's grown a little bit, but we wanted to kind of approach it from a different angle. And so we did that work with the three agencies because, again, we know that not all of the maintenance and PLR that's in the CIP approved is what we actually need to do. And so we want to be able to provide that information to the council and to policymakers. And the most important conversation we had as a work group is that what some council members might remember, is what some public members might remember, is the backlog. Well, we have a $5 billion backlog across all these things. I think what the work group decided is that terminology and that approach is unhelpful because who's going to build $5 billion today? Who's going to approach that today? And so what the work group really wants to focus on is what's the actual acceptable annual replacement cost? What's the current funding in the CIP, and how much more do we need to get to that annual acceptable replacement cost? Understanding that if we were able to achieve that annual cost, and grow with that annual cost, ultimately the backlog will be addressed. And the tables we have attached, we tried to do our best to have the CIP projects line up with this so that council members, as they go through this in future iterations, can more specifically target things where there's a gap. But clearly, unsurprisingly, we have a significant gap in the CIP in terms of what we actually need to be maintaining and what is approved, which is the big takeaway from this table. And then finally, we've been, at least in terms of data, we wanted to make sure we present data on where other infrastructure is being invested, both from our development community when development's happening, as well as from our federal and state partners, such as the Purple Line. That data is being refined. It's not ready for prime time, but we hope to just have that as background information. And then in terms of future infrastructure needs, again, data that's not fully ready for prime time, the agencies have been working on unconstrained policy investments. What are the things if we want to build everything that we said we need to build or that we wanted to build? What's that going to cost? What do those numbers look like? And then one of the terms we've been using in the work group, or at least from stakeholders, is what's going to move the needle. And so we will have that included when we look at the proposed funding mechanisms. How do we approach that? So what are some of the discussions? These are maybe preliminary findings, although I think that word might suggest that these are obvious or not. I'm sorry, more special. I think a lot of this is going to come across as very obvious. But one of the things I think that we want to wrestle with as we begin looking at proposed mechanisms. Construction costs increase year over year. We all know that. Inflation, market forces, sometimes they increase faster, sometimes they don't, but they increase year over year. We've also been spending some time talking about just how planning, design, and supervision in our budgets have started to increase. It's just the reality. There's more regulatory work that we need to go through. There's more expectations to plan and design, and that has increased costs to our projects beyond just the actual capital needs. And then ultimately, the double-edged sword of infill development for both the county and developers has increased costs. Like, we are no longer doing a lot of greenfield development in this county. We're doing infill development, and that changes the rubric. And one of the reasons why this is, although obvious, important to say, is that the capital budget needs to grow with our just inflation cost. And ultimately, proposed funding mechanisms will need to address that. So we already kind of highlighted this. I'll move through this one a little fast, but again, the county's infrastructure funding has started to focus a lot more on just maintaining the things we've already bought or replacing the things we've already bought. And those funding mechanisms will need to come from a different source than, say, new growth. And so that'll be some of the conversation we need to have. I mean, I won't go through all these points, but we've grown for 50 years, and so we've bought a lot. We had additional slides in the packet. I've hidden those for now just to save time, but our population has started to grow a little less. Enrollment is starting to change, and they're diverging from each other. And so how we want to tackle those things, the work group wants to wrestle with in terms of how do we address the changing both enrollment and population trends in our county to address the growing needs in our capital budget. And of course, the work group talked about competing policy decisions within the CIP. There's always policy decisions in terms of how to address ongoing maintenance with new projects that need to be tackled with long deferred things, and so that is part of the reason why there's the mixture in the approved CIP. And then the last thing we've been talking about a lot is just the capital budget. Unlike, say, the operating budget relies on revenue sources that just are constrained or uncertain. So we have a lot of current revenue in there that's a policy decision each year by the executive and by the council. On the economic side, impact taxes and recordation taxes are dependent on the economy. And then a lot of our new projects are dependent on federal and state aid to support those projects. And so I think this is why the community feels, and why we think why the community feels that there's a tension within the capital budget is it does not grow along the same way as our operating budget has grown with our revenues in terms of property taxes and income taxes. And so that does create a lot of the tension in terms of how do we, at least for the work group, think about what funding mechanism can grow with the capital budget so they're not always relying on policy decisions or economic certainty. So these are, unsurprisingly, the funding options we're going to be looking at and diving into more. I want to note that, like, as we do this, we'll again be looking both at the racial equity and social justice for each of these, the sustainability, the predictability, just the beneficiaries between the payers and the non-payers for each of these, the suitability for new capacity, for maintenance, et cetera, and as well as just the regulatory barriers. And so all of these except sales tax are available to the county now, which is primarily the reason why we're looking at them. We've included sales tax because the state's talked about it. It's also a common tax used by other jurisdictions to fund infrastructure. And so certainly if that's something the state eventually gives local jurisdictions in Maryland, we wanted to be ready for that. And so we will be spending the next couple months on this one in terms of coming up with proposed funding mechanisms. And then that's when we'll finalize our findings, the mechanisms, and then move forth to do this feedback for both stakeholders, the public, and incorporate that by June 30th into a report. So appreciate your time, and we're available for questions.
Great. Well, thank you for that interim report and everybody who is here for your work on this. I do also want to note, Mr. Smith, you referenced it, but they're on the county website. All the minutes from your meetings and all the past documents and everything are readily available, and I appreciate that. I've been following along to the different meetings to see the progress and appreciate the conversations. And I think one thing that I don't think you noted in your presentation, but I remember from the minutes and the conversations the task force has had is on those definitions and talking about new capacity versus using the term that we've used in the past, which is backlog, and really thinking that new capacity is a way of thinking about how we're adding to it, and the maintenance is the ongoing, what we need to be doing. And so I think clarifying those terms I know it was a lot of work, and I do think will be very helpful as we move forward. And so I want to thank you all for that. And I think underlying those definitions and then the tables you showed us, the point you also made about, how are we moving forward and thinking about funding projects that are really maintenance and needing to take care of what we already have in our schools, in our parks, in our transportation, and who pays for that versus who's paying for that new capacity. As we are trying to attract new businesses here, new residents. And I think that was some of the tension when we were having the conversation around the growth and infrastructure policy and how our impact taxes were working comes out. And I'm glad to see that you're moving forward in that direction. So as somebody who worked on the resolution to create the task force, and I think we had a very robust conversation here at Government Operations to make sure that we were providing enough guidance. This is moving forward as I had personally hoped it would. So I want to thank you for that work, and I look forward to the final report. And I'll turn it over to Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. First off, thank you all for everything you're doing on this. This is part of what we need to make certain that we're doing, and you've touched on this, is we need to clarify the terms and be consistent with what the terms mean, because we don't necessarily always do that. And Jean, you pointed out, like, for instance, Crown Farm School, that was built for capacity, and now, of course, there's a lot of discussion that it's not going to be used that way, or that there might not be used that way. And I think we have to keep that in mind, that we need to be consistent for what, if someone is paying a premium price because of capacity, then we need to live by our rules as well. And so I think that's something that needs to be. And the other thing that I just want to touch on is the uncertain revenue sources. Infrastructure is perhaps the most, there's a lot of the most important things we do in government, but it probably should be the most important, one of the most important things that we do. And we have uncertain revenue sources for it. Nobody says, I want to go, I need something to eat and maybe I'll get some money to do it. We need to make sure that we can do this. So whether or not we're wise to do the uncertain revenue sources, or whether we should be doing something else, impact taxes, and part of the issue on that is we don't want to use the term backlog, but we have problems from the past. We're not correcting those. And then we're saying, well, if we get some more money, we'll get some. That's not working. So we need to figure out a better way. And that's not an easy thing to do, but we need to figure out a better way. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Sure. This is some good stuff. I wish your report was coming out before June 30th. You could use that right now. But just in going back to you talking about the public outreach that you're going to do, I think it's going to really be important. And you stated it, the racial equity and social justice piece, because the community needs to hear us say that there are some inequities and there are going to be, some challenges for, like, I'm looking at your background in particular for people that are going to have the opportunity to do things that they haven't been able to do in the past, and what that lift is going to look like. So with the community outreach, like, are you going to go into different parts of the county, or like, what's that going to look like?
I did all the talking, but that's fine. I'll start. So to be determined, although when we talked, we did say that we will need multiple avenues to get outreach, including community visits. So I don't want to say that. So I believe that will happen. I don't want to say where it will happen yet, because I don't think we've, as a work group, have discussed that. And so we will, as I already emailed this week, we will be leaning on our friends in planning a lot on some of the ways they approach that to help give us some structure in the conversation. But as Councilmember Stewart noted, stay tuned to our minutes for our agenda for March 20th, because I believe that's when we'll spend some more time outlining that. But yes, the answer is yes, we will do that.
And as much as, and it's already been stated, but as much as we could make the language as plain as possible, it will be very helpful to residents as they're coming up to speed as to what's happening, and then for those who already know, just to get more clarity. But no, this is really great stuff, and it makes me wish that I had more than just a year to be here. But anyway, no. So just thank you all for doing this task force, and to my colleagues for asking it to be, in existence. So thanks.
Great. Terrific. Well, we really appreciate your work on this. And as Councilmember Evans said, really, as we're doing that public outreach, this is like, there's a lot here to unpack. And I know that, as we're doing our own budget, things will get confusing. It's inevitable. So being able to clarify and what we're talking about here, and I have to say, because my sister lives in Florida, and literally right now they're talking about getting rid of like property taxes in Florida, and it's just the conversations that are happening around some places, and what like sounds good as like when you first do it, but then you think about, okay, then where is the money coming from to do this, this, and this, and what, when we do have these revenue streams and what it actually funds, and connecting those two for people and thinking about how we're planning is so important, because you see how sometimes conversations can take a turn. And decisions can be made. And so I do appreciate that this report is coming out at the end of June, and the work that you all are doing. And so thank you for that.
Apologies. I named a couple in the audience, but I also don't want to thank Mrs. Du and Mr. Ali, who are on council staff, who you all know so well.
Yes.
That it just didn't occur to me to actually say their names again. So,
Yeah.
But not to end on just a funny note, I totally agree. And I think the one thing I was remiss to say is that the work group does not, I think I'm confident to say there is no magic bullet to this that's going to solve this. And so we want to give you all as council members the options and the flexibility to understand how to talk about that with the community as decisions are made later on past the report. So thank you, Chair Stewart.
Great. Thank you all. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.